Today's reaction is brought to us by Imperial. Be sure to click his link in the description to check out his videos.
A commando squad of militants have just sprung a daring trap on Vinzenzstadtstraße in the West German city of Cologne. They have intercepted the West German industrialist and business magnate Hans-Martin Schleyer and his security detail by rolling a baby carriage in front of their vehicles, forcing Schleyer's chauffeur to slam on the brakes, stopping on a dime. The police escort behind the front car are unable to slow down in time, and they crash into the back of Schleyer's Mercedes. It is at this point that 5 gunmen emerge from cover, dousing the 2 cars in a storm of bullets. 2 police officers attempt to return fire.
What kind of crossfire is this, you fucking moron? What the fuck is this? Oh, I get it. It's just a graph.
As in a storm of bullets. 2 police officers attempt to return fire, but they are outnumbered, outgunned, and pinned inside their car. They are sitting ducks. After a brief cacophony, the air clears of lead and gun smoke, revealing a gruesome scene: 3 police officers and the chauffeur dead, blood plastered on every surface. Schleyer survives the onslaught, but he isn't lucky. The assailants don't want to kill him. Not yet. They have another purpose in mind for him. Schleyer is dragged out of his car, incapacitated, and then loaded into the back of a white VW bus. It ends almost as quickly as it started, with the bus speeding off into the distance. Schleyer would not be seen again for 43 days, kept in isolation in 2 locations, one in Erftstadt-Liebla and one in Brussels. What just happened is just the tip of the iceberg. For months, the same militant gang that committed the Schleyer kidnapping terrorized West Germany. The Red Army faction, an extreme left-leaning militant organization who were anti-capitalist, anti-establishment, and in their own words, anti-imperialist, were the perpetrators. They had, since April of 1977, killed the West German Attorney General Siegfried Buback, attempted to kidnap, but ended up killing the CEO of the Dresdner Bank, Jürgen Ponto, and on the 25th of August, less than 2 weeks before the Schleyer kidnapping, attempted to fire rockets carrying a total of 1 kilogram of explosives into a government building out of which a West German federal prosecutor operated. Fortunately, the plan failed, because the timer meant to trigger the firing of the rockets was not properly set. Schleyer's kidnapping, the most recent in the chain of attacks, was part of a ploy to force the West German government to release members of the RAF who were being held in Stammheim prison. Most importantly, the gang's leader and founder, Andreas Baader. The imprisoned members had been found guilty of murdering 4 people and attempting to murder 39 more, alongside auxiliary charges of bombing US military emplacements in April of 1977. Having exhausted all legal options to secure their release, they resorted to extorting the West German government by abducting someone who they believed was the manifestation of all that was wrong with West Germany. A rich capitalist who had, during the Second World War, been an SS officer involved in the final solution. It was their hope that the government would fold to their demands to keep a West German citizen safe. Schleyer would be kept hostage for more than a month before the RAF resorted to more drastic measures. When the West German government, headed by Chancellor Helmut Schmidt, failed to respond to demands and imposed a media blackout...
Is it usually more left-leaning people or right-leaning people that result or justify violent or drastic or radicalized measures to achieve their goals? Historically, I feel like it's both as well. That's what I feel as well. I feel like the answer is radicalized side. Whether it's radicalized, they're going to do radical actions.
The RAF escalated the stakes of their operation. They got into contact with a militant
horseshoe
organization
theory
based
type
in
shit,
Palestine, with whom they had strong ideological ties, and had trained in proximity with in the early 1970s under the PLO. They asked that the PFLP hijack a German airliner in the hope that the sheer number of human lives at stake would induce the Schmid administration to cooperate with their demands. What would happen next was one of the longest hijackings in history, and one that plummeted German society further into fear and terror. The 6th of October 1977. 1,300 kilometers away from the city of Cologne, on the Balearic island of Mallorca, a Palestinian man by the name of Zoher Youssef Akache arrives in Palma de Mallorca airport on the 6th of October. He checks in at the Hotel Costa Azul. The next day, on the 7th, 2 others join him, a woman by the name of Souheila Sayeh and a man called Wabil Harb, both Lebanese nationals. The group appeared to be tourists, going about their day visiting sites and sampling the city's restaurants and bars. Nothing seems out of the ordinary. On the same day, Akache and Sayeh meet with a woman and her husband, one Monica Haas and a man travelling on a forged Persian passport in the name of Servati Kamal. His real name? Unknown. Haas and the man are with a baby carriage. In it is a baby, but less obviously also 2 pistols, 6 grenades and a kilogram of high explosives packaged in English sweet tins. The exchange between Haas and the 2 supposed tourists goes off without a hitch, and they return to the Costa Azul hotel with ammunition, weapons and high explosives. Some strange souvenirs to bring back from a holiday, indeed. A final person joins the group on the 8th of October, a Palestinian woman called Nadia Duaibes, who turns out to be Akache's lover, revealing some issues within the group. Sayeh and Akache are meant to be posing as lovers, and it irritated her that his actual lover was here. Thus, to make it more believable, they swapped rooms and roles. Now, it might have occurred to the more observant viewer at this point that these people aren't your average tourists. If we trace back their steps, we can see that earlier in the month they were in Iraq, in the capital of Baghdad, meeting with the top brass of Palestinian militant organizations such as Wadi Haddad, the leader of the PFLP. Here they are informed that they are to hijack a German passenger plane from Mallorca. They are initially not given much information as to why, nothing beyond to, quote, secure the release of Palestinian compatriots in Israel. They are sent to final weapons training at a PFLP facility, and then they all set off on their fateful journey to Mallorca. 13th of October, 1977.
There's a lot of pieces to this thing, Jesus Christ now.
It is a cold, overcast Thursday in the city of Palma. The 4 hijackers leave the Hotel Costa Azul in the morning and take the 15-minute drive to the Palma de Mallorca airport. They have with them a radio and a vanity kit. Within them are stashed the grenades, pistols, ammunition, and explosives that they picked up the week prior. Once they arrive at the airport, they pass through security fairly easily. You see, it had only been 2 years since the International Civil Aviation Organization, also known as ICAO, had convened to draft one of the world's first comprehensive standardizations of airport security. But even then, recommendations were limited, vague, and left much up to individual states to decide how to implement security measures. Mallorca, one of Spain's smaller airports, had probably not undergone security modernizations yet due to this.
Yeah, obviously.
At 12:30, the hijackers board Lufthansa Flight 181, nicknamed Landshut after a town in the state of Bavaria.
Why is it so often the Lufthansa flights, man? I like Lufthansa. I enjoy the airline. I think it's nice.
About 1 hour later, the aircraft is airborne, travelling to its intended destination of Frankfurt. However, at some point shortly after takeoff, just as the cabin staff start distributing food, the 4 hijackers leap into action, jumping from their seats, gesturing wildly and shouting at passengers. They clear the first-class cabin and directed all passengers into the remaining seats in second class. Everything that could be used as weaponry against the hijackers, such as the forks and knives from the prepared meals, are taken away. Personal effects and identification, like passports, are also confiscated. Finally, the hijackers breach the cockpit, removing the co-pilot Jürgen Vietor from the cabin and shoving him into economy class with the rest of the hostages. They demand that the flight be rerouted to Cyprus, but due to the lack of fuel, the pilot Jürgen Schumann suggests landing in Rome instead. At 2:38, a flight tracking station in Aix-en-Provence picks up that the aircraft is off course. It is also around this time that the first communications come from the aircraft, with the leader, Akache, who is styling himself as Captain Walter Mahmoud.
Impressive. Barely any security, way back when, 1950s, and this plane gets an earlier warning kind of call or earlier warning notice than some of the fucking hijacked planes in recent times. They were just
over the radio
in the 70s, sorry.
Announcing that the aircraft is now under his supervision and control. Flight 181 lands in Rome's Fiumicino airport at 3:45, and the hijackers demand that the plane be refueled. Akache radios the traffic control tower and demands for the release of political prisoners being held in West German prisons. This is the first indication that the hijacking is linked to the Schleier kidnapping and the Red Army faction. In Rome, the flight's captain, Schumann, drops 4 cigars out of the window to communicate to authorities how many hijackers are on board. This tactic works, and authorities correctly guess the intent of the message. By 5:45, the aircraft has been refueled
who is this
and
Chad?
now sets a course for Cyprus's Nicosia airport. But mid-flight is informed by other Lufthansa pilots in the vicinity that Nicosia is non-operational. Presumably, this meant Nicosia would not allow the plane to land there. Instead, Flight 181 is redirected to Larnaca Airport, south of Nicosia. While this was happening, the West German government, headed by Chancellor Helmut Schmidt, mobilized the anti-terror task force known as GSG-9, Grenzschutzgruppe 9, and as soon as they were able, had them head for an intercept course to Cyprus. Once the aircraft had landed in Larnaca at 8:28, the hijackers again demanded to be refueled, otherwise they threatened to detonate the explosives they had on the aircraft. They also repeated their request for the release of German prisoners, as well as 2 more Palestinians held in Turkish prisons. While they were on the ground, the Cypriot foreign minister attempted to negotiate a release of, quote, women, children, and the sick, who were on the plane, but he made no headway. Following this, an unnamed man who claimed to be part of the Palestinian liberation movement in Cyprus attempted to talk to the hijackers' leader. However, Akache instantly barked a retort. "I do not care who you are. Whoever you are, I don't want to talk to you." In the background, the 30 GSG-9 officers had been en route to Cyprus on Flight 1231 and had landed on the island while Flight 181 was still there at around 9:20. However, they had landed at the British Akrotiri airbase some way southwest, presumably not to alert the hijackers. They were ultimately unable to reach the aircraft in time before it took off for its next destination,
The fuck?
and thus they relocated to Ankara for further instruction.
Why didn't they land in some fucking
Around
some fucking wheat
10:50,
field somewhere?
The aircraft was yet again airborne and initially headed for Beirut, then Damascus, then Kuwait. They were denied landing permission by all 3 airports. They travelled for some time more before finally reaching Bahrain at 1:32 in the morning. They only stay here for just under 2 hours, again repeating the demands for the release of prisoners, further confirming the connection to the RAF, and setting a deadline for this ultimatum, threatening to blow the plane sky high by 9 a.m. on Sunday the 16th if the demands are not met. That gives only 2 days for the West Germans to organise a response. The plane departs Bahrain en route for Dubai International Airport at around 3:24 in the morning, but it is forced into a holding pattern.
I'm confused why they didn't shoot it down at this point. I mean, guys, I hate to say shit like this, but I mean, the plane in the air, they could go into a building, into other places, whatever, and cause a lot more casualty than they would already have. It's literally a flying weapon.
At around
Civilians? Yeah, but I mean, dude.
3:24 in
Guys,
the morning, but it is forced into a holding pattern until
shooting
merely
airborne
minutes
threats
before they
is
run out
not
of fuel, they are permitted to land
uncommon.
at 5:51. It is now the 14th of October. More than 16 hours have passed since the aircraft left Mallorca and since it was hijacked. While they are stationed in Dubai, the hijackers make requests for water and food and continue to make demands. In West Germany, Chancellor Schmidt elects to send his state secretary, Hans-Jürgen Wisniewski, to Dubai, with an additional 31 GSG-9 officers.
How am I bad or evil?
Cash.
Okay, then let's say that there's a thing, an airplane going to a building. You just go, brother, it is what it is. What it is. We can't kill the civilians. Sorry. Let's let more die in the good grace of not killing any civilians. Poggers. It's like the trolley problem. Do you intentionally kill 100 to save 1,000, or do nothing and lose 1,100?
They board an Airbus 707 codenamed Oscar X-Ray in the afternoon and arrive in Dubai at around 11:35 in the evening. For the rest of the following day, Wisniewski is engaged in negotiations with the hijackers, but is unable to convince them to release the hostages or come to a compromise. After nearly 2 days on the aircraft, conditions are starting to become uncomfortable for the passengers, with them being forced to stay in their cramped seats at threats of violence if they move. The pilot Schumann is allowed to make a statement directed at Chancellor Schmidt over the radio at 7:50 in the morning on the 15th of October. The lives of 91 men, women and children on board this flight are at the mercy of your decision. You are our last and only hope. Wisniewski persuades the UAE Defense Minister Mohammed bin Rashid to allow a scouting operation on his territory, on the condition UAE forces are allowed to participate. Disguised as mechanics, they scout the plane out and deliver food, water and medicine, and even a birthday cake to the aircraft to celebrate one of the stewardesses' birthdays. Tensions ease here somewhat, but not for long. Negotiations between the hijackers and Wisniewski continue until the 9 AM deadline on Sunday the 16th. But nothing happens. The hijackers don't blow up the plane. At 12:19 on the same day, the aircraft takes off yet again and attempts to land at Oman's Masirah airport, but is denied landing permission. At this point, control towers tracking the plane lose it for some time. Suddenly, the plane appears over Yemeni airspace and demands landing permission at Aden airport. As they only have roughly 10 minutes of fuel left, they do not wait for an answer, with Akache barking, "We are coming in, I repeat, we are coming in." They land just adjacent to the runway, on a flat, sandy area at around 3:55. The pilot, Schumann, tells the hijackers this may have damaged the landing gear. As soon as word comes in that the aircraft has landed at Aden, Wisniewski and his GSG-9 contingent mobilize to Yemen. But they are denied landing and are ultimately rerouted to Jeddah in Saudi Arabia. At this point, Chancellor Schmidt radios Wisniewski, giving him the green light on a more forceful approach. Schumann is given permission to go inspect the landing gear after the rough landing, and while doing so, wanders into the security cordon set aside by Yemeni security forces, and tries to convince them to not let the plane take off. When he returns, Akache accuses him of trying to escape, and forces him to kneel in the aisle of the cabin, before shooting him in the head in front of the passengers and dumping his body onto the tarmac. The first casualty of the hijacking. The co-pilot, Jürgen Vitor, is forced into the cabin and told to take off in the direction of Somalia. The plane takes off from Aden at 2:02 in the morning on October the 17th and lands in Mogadishu a little over 2 hours later.
I think this happened, if this happened today, regardless of fucking 9/11 and shit, would people know, like, about, like, hostage takers and hostage negotiations? No way this would have happened like that. They would never let them take off, ever. No shot.
4:35. As soon as
Would
the
a
plane
casualty
touches
like that?
down in
Oh, hell no.
Mogadishu, Schmidt gets into contact with the Somali president, Siad Barre, who after some negotiation allows the West German forces to stage a rescue attempt. Following the agreement, the second group of GSG-9 commandos, which had since relocated to Crete from Cologne, is given the green light to fly south to Somalia to regroup with the other squad. On board are medical personnel provided by the Greek government in case the operation goes sour. The first plane, en route from Saudi Arabia, arrives in Mogadishu at 11:44 on the 17th. And the second at 5:30 with their lights off as to not alert the hijackers. The hijackers become increasingly unsettled and start to escalate their threats, tying up hostages and dousing them in the remaining on-board liquor to scare negotiators into thinking a bombing was imminent. This caused West German negotiators to feign acquiescence to their demands, stating they would release the requested 11 prisoners and fly them directly to Mogadishu. This was a bluff and it got the hijackers to untie the hostages. Akache then informed the Mogadishu tower and the negotiators that it is 7 hours flying time from Germany. I will give you exactly 7 hours. Don't try any tricks. He agreed to put off the ultimatum of blowing up the plane until 3:30 a.m. the next morning. So, the GSG-9 had only a few hours to strike before the hijackers realized there was something wrong. They struck quickly, setting their assault into motion at 5 minutes past midnight. Back in Bonn, a member of Schmidt's crisis group testified that just before and as the assault was occurring, the room was deathly silent. He stated, "You could have heard a speck of dust move." The suspense was palpable. Back in Mogadishu, the German forces are slowly creeping their way over to the plane, camouflaged in black to obscure their presence. The hijackers are completely unaware. They reach the underside of the aircraft and place explosive charges on the doors. Finally, a diversionary explosion on the runway is set off, and the GSG-9 group detonate their explosive. They place ladders on the side of the aircraft and quickly climb in, shouting, "Hinlegen, hinlegen," lie down, as they rush into the cabin and neutralize the hijackers. One, Nadia Duaibes, is shot and she crumples down into the toilet at the front of the plane. Akache is shot in the cockpit and slumps onto the center console, and Nadil Harb survives long enough to be dragged out of the plane and given medical attention. But he dies at the scene. Only one survives, Suhaila Sayeh, and she is brought out on a stretcher, asking the commandos to kill her. At the end of the assault, which took only 7 minutes, one commando had been injured by returning small arms fire, as well as 4 passengers and 1 stewardess. But no casualties, except, of course, for the pilot who had been murdered 2 days before. A call is made to Bonn. Mr. Wisniewski states over the phone, "Die Arbeit ist erledigt." Job is done.
Holy.
On the 18th of October, when news reached the RAF leadership in Stammheim prison of their comrades' failure and subsequent deaths at the hands of the GSG-9.
Oh, that's why you don't shoot it down. Case closed. Over. GG. You win the argument. You won the argument. GG.
3 people, Bada, Enslin, and Raspe, succeeded. A 4th, Irmgard Müller, allegedly stabbed herself multiple times, but did not die, and was given medical attention after being found in her cell. Müller contended that the deaths had not been suicides, and that instead they were assassinations perpetrated by the West German government. If this is true, no evidence to suggest this is the case has come to see the light of day, and it seems particularly strange that Müller was left to live and given medical attention if this indeed did happen. You'd think they'd want to tie up any loose ends. Once it had become clear the ploy to release the prisoners had failed, worse, they were dead, the RAF members who had kidnapped Hans-Martin Schleyer more than a month and a half prior decided to dispose of him. He had, to them, become dead weight and was no longer an asset. In a letter sent to French newspaper Libération on October 19th, the RAF declared, "We have, after 43 days, ended Hans-Martin Schleyer's miserable and corrupt existence. Mr. Schmid, who from the beginning of his power calculus speculated with Schleyer's life, can pick him up in the green Audi 100 with the Bad Homburger number plate on the Rue Charles de Pougy in Mulhouse." His body was found on the same day in the town of Mulhouse on the Franco-German border.
I cannot believe how Chad that is an actual terrorist.
An Audi A100, just as the letter had described, with a bullet in the back. The Red Army faction continued to operate following this, but as Gillian Becker, a historian who covers the Red Army faction, notes, their ranks had been heavily decimated. They would merge with the 2nd of June movement to bolster their membership, but ultimately the RAF's influence would gradually decline, with its attacks growing less frequent and potent, before finally disbanding in 1998.
Oh, the guy was a Nazi. Oh, therefore terrorism is justified. Buggers. It makes sense, my bad. Sorry about that. My bad.
The 1970s, and more specifically the German autumn, was a tumultuous time for the West German state and the German
must be
people.
employed.
Violence and terror were the defining characteristics of the decade, reflected in countless Der Spiegel articles with paranoia-inducing headlines and front covers, depicting masked vigilantes with guns and repeating the threats of terror for the wider public to sink their teeth and their hearts into. Police checkpoints, news bulletins, perennial bomb threats, constant reminders to be vigilant and to keep an eye out for the wanted members of the RAF, their posters plastered on every street corner. It is no wonder that this period is a site of trauma in German history. It was like living in a constant state of anxiety, where the development of surveillance practices and the increasing illiberalism of a state scrambling to clamp down on terrorism coalesced with a general feeling of unease, that a bomb meant for a government official might instead take your child or yourself. The RAF did not need to be prolific in its attacks, it just needed to be brutal, and brutal it was. As the historian John Christian Schmeide puts it, the RAF punched at a level far beyond its weight. Because of its policy of targeting political and business functionaries for assassination, and a high success rate when it did, the RAF had succeeded in instilling a distinct nervousness in the country's administrative and economic elite. For an organisation that never numbered 30 at any one time, it had succeeded in inflicting considerable hardship upon a liberal democracy. Although the RAF rarely targeted non-public figures, it did not mean their attacks were seen as any less traumatic by the public. The German political writer Jan Philipp Remsma argues that for state fear and terror to be effective, it must only target a few people, and only make it known that these people meet horrible fates. It must only torture and maim a few, release one or two to tell their stories, and the desired effect will be achieved. Fear of dissent and subsequently fear of the state itself and its capacity for terrible acts. Gotcha. I believe the RAF had a similar effect on the German public. They did not have to kill or kidnap many people. The sheer brutality and effectiveness of their operations instilled fear in the general population merely as a byproduct of notoriety. Sure, the kidnappings and killings happened between a small number of people, but as Rimtsma explains, a third party, in this case the public, also played a role, specifically in practicing empathy and reproducing the anxieties, fears and paranoias of acts of terror vicariously. This must have been exacerbated when the RAF, through its associated groups, hijacked a civilian aircraft, communicating that even the general public could be in danger. The RAF's tendency to target elite members of society also meant that the state was far more hardline with its reaction to terrorism, and that meant more extreme interventions in the lives of ordinary people, and thus the pervasiveness of paranoia. The film Deutschland im Herbst depicts the atmosphere of fear and discomfort that accompanied West Germany's heightened security controls. One reviewer stated that in the present climate of hysteria, repression, and self-censorship, terrorism and its relatively private consequences is becoming a taboo subject, and one which it takes a political courage merely to name. The film serves to alert foreign audiences to the prevalence of fear and self-censorship in, quote, everyday German life. As indicated here, people were afraid of talking about it, despite its prevalence in society and the massive amount of metaphorical real estate it occupied within the German media. This strange mixture of increased state control, terrorism and a general atmosphere of political upheaval reminded many, particularly West Germany's liberals, of the still in living memory decline of the Weimar Republic and the rise of the Nazi Party. The justification for the centralization of power in this period was also grounded in the supposed threat to the state following the Reichstag fire of 1933. And as such, some were wary of the heightened authority that the Bundestag was gaining. Others, more concerned with the threats of violence and instability, the more politically conservative and reactionary, became increasingly impatient with protest.
I remember the things I always remember the things that I learned in videos. I think it's very interesting. I find the opinionated parts. It's mostly factual, slightly opinionated in wording. So it's objective to the reporting of what happened, I assume, through facts and whatever. But it's opinionated through wording. I'll
thought more should be done to curtail political deviance. As the New York Times put it in December of 1977, in this spiral of mutual suspicion, there is a danger that criticism of state and society could become muted. The hijacking of Flight 181 and the previous months of terror thus contributed to an environment of fear in West Germany, where the public had to be concerned with both the threat of terrorism and the heightened imposition of the state. The latter took on a haunting quality, considering the relatively fresh memory of the NSDAP's threat of terror of fear in West Germany, where the public had to be concerned with both the threat of terrorism and the heightened imposition of the state. The latter took on a haunting quality, considering the relatively fresh memory of the NSDAP's campaigns of political repression in Weimar Germany and then Nazi Germany. The strange convergence of the two also caused some to self-censor and render terrorism a taboo subject. It became a background noise that often people refused to discuss due to its uncomfortable relation to state repression and surveillance, and the chance that someone might misinterpret your criticism of said state encroachment as tacit support of terrorism.
Yeah, I can see that.
Of course, I do not mean to paint in broad strokes. I'm personally aware of people who were open to discussing the topic of terrorism even during the late 1970s. But I think overall it is safe to say that it wasn't a particularly comfortable topic for discussion for most people. That being said, if you have differing anecdotes and you yourself are German, feel free to put them in the comment section below. Today, the terrorism of the 1970s is no longer a taboo subject. However, the period is still carved into the German public consciousness. In 2016, when a slew of terror attacks shook Germany and wider Europe to its foundation, the first point of reference for many German media outlets was of course the events of 1977, a testament to the resilience of the German autumn and its prominence in the collective memory of terrorism. Germany has done what it can to bring closure to the period by prosecuting and bringing to justice those that perpetrated the attacks. And although a few have eluded the courts, the vast majority were caught or de-radicalized. There are also monuments and memorials dedicated to the German autumn and its victims, and in 2017, the German government bought the old Lufthansa aircraft back from a Brazilian scrapyard to exhibit it at the Dornier Museum in Friedrichshafen. The German Foreign Minister, Sigmar Gabriel, told Bild that the message of the Landshut hijacking is, "We won't let terrorism get us down," and that during the heightened terror threat in Europe, it was important not to forget the lessons of the hijacking.
That was an interesting video.
To conclude, it is important to recognize the extraordinary nature of the German autumn. 5 months of terror capped off by a 43-day kidnapping and subsequent killing, and a 5-day hijacking that straddled 7 countries, from the Mediterranean to the Indian Ocean, resolved only through the intervention of German counter-terrorism forces. Although other nations may have experienced similarly expansive terrorist incidents, Germany's is unique in the sense of its cultural resilience and socio-political importance. One might even say, if a little bit flippantly, that it was Germany's 9/11.
Or could have been. What? Literally could have been. I don't think that's the frank comment.
I wear headphones.
Yeah, but I went to school. No, a lot. I went to school enough. The fuck? I think terrorism equals bad. I don't really give a fuck. I'm not gonna hear you on your motive or your whatever, your ideology. I don't give a fuck. I literally, I put both my thumbs into my ears and I stop listening. You know? You don't negotiate with terrorists. That's just kind of what it is. I'm not gonna hear it. So when I see like Giga Chad terrorism, whatever, I don't give a shit. You're dumb as fuck. Give me the love.